My guest today is an expert in campaign finance and the former chief counsel for the DNC, Joe Birkenstock. Joe, thank you for coming back on.
My pleasure, Brian.
Now, Trump's campaign filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, against Biden and Kamala Harris, accusing them of violating campaign finance laws by rolling Biden's campaign funds over to Kamala Harris's. So is this a campaign finance violation?
No, Brian, in one word, it's not. And it's made clear really by the nature of the way these presidential campaign committees have really always run under the Federal Election Campaign Act. The president and the vice president run as a joint ticket. And that has been true for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden all the way back to 2020, when they first ran for office successfully as a joint ticket. It was true then. It was true all throughout this cycle. It's still true right now as she stands up and takes over as the party's nominee.
Okay, so to be clear here, is there really even any money to transfer over since it was the Biden-Harris ticket all along? Like, is Harris's campaign an entirely separate entity?
That's a great question, Brian. Actually, the answer is no. It is not a separate entity. It's the same bank account. It's the same committee, filing all the same reports under the same FEC identification number. It's really the same everything, except that Joe Biden is not going to be the presidential nominee this time. Kamala Harris is. And that's really the only change that's happening. But there's nothing to be transferred by anything to anything.
Does the fact that she's going to add a new name to the mix with her eventual VP choice, does that change things here?
You know, it will once she does that, but it really doesn't change anything with respect to the fact that this has been her campaign committee since 2020. It's very similar to the stance that Trump and J.D. Vance are in the process of changing right now. What has been Trump for president is going to become Trump for president, J.D. Vance for vice president, as soon as they make that change with him becoming the vice presidential nominee.
Even if not a campaign finance violation, the goal here may very well be to just, grind the gears in terms of the money actually being able to be used, because it would get caught up in some type of litigation between Biden and Harris. So what could Trump's lawyers actually accomplish, actually achieve just by virtue of filing this complaint?
Yeah, I think, strategically, it probably has a couple of different purposes. And one of them is, you're putting your finger on, just throwing mud against the wall, just kind of waiting to see if something sticks. The Republican lawyer that wrote that Wall Street Journal piece, it's an experienced lawyer who knows, how the system works. He made an allusion to the end of Chevron deference, right, by the Supreme Court, and how that puts judges in a more potentially aggressive position to kind of lean in and take some greater action. But I think that's extremely unlikely on the facts we have here.
So is it actually possible, thanks to Chevron, that a judge could interpret FEC law better than the FEC could interpret FEC law?
Yeah, that's really a great way to put it. I mean, the FEC is such a great example of an agency that has really, really complicated rules, and for a lot of understandable reasons, right? I mean, the billions of dollars being raised and spent, lots of difficult judgment calls that have to be made on the fly as these things unfold. I don't think a judge should be eager to step in, especially with a case like this, where there's the nature of the filings that the candidates and the committees have made makes this perfectly clear. This has been Kamala Harris's committee for over 5 years, and there's nothing to be transferred, as you put your finger on earlier. So it's really not a case that I see much appeal for a judge to lean in and put their own fingerprints on it.
I want to draw your attention to the first FEC statement of organization filed by the Donald J. Trump for President, Inc. committee, and this was back in the 2020 election cycle. So I'm going to put the image right here on the screen. You'll see who's listed at the top of page 2 as the candidates, and that's candidates plural, for whom Donald J. Trump for President, Inc. was the principal campaign committee. So am I sensing a bit of hypocrisy here, because Donald Trump was able to have 2 people listed in his official filings and yet is right now engaging in litigation against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for doing the exact same thing?
100%, Brian. I mean, I think there's so many ways to play this that this is such a perfect illustration of. This has been the approach taken by literally every sitting vice president during the duration of the Federal Election Campaign Act. You have never seen a vice president open a vice presidential campaign committee. Because why? What are they running for? Or why? Right. In what way is that different than the ticket that they're running as part of? So for really 100 reasons, both legally and traditionally, as this illustrates, the argument that somehow this has always been the case, but it's only now that we're realizing that this is the way it's supposed to work, really flies in the face of actually 50 years of lived history that shows that it simply isn't true.
Which is really par for the course. I mean, Republicans look at precedent, legal precedent, historical precedent, whatever it is, and they've just decided that if it isn't politically convenient for them, they're going to do whatever they can to push back on it. And that's why we have Roe overturned. That's why we had Chevron overturned. That's why on every issue under the sun, Republicans are looking to discard precedent because it isn't politically advantageous for them.
I couldn't agree more, Brian. One way I've seen that put sometimes is every accusation is a confession.
That's right.
And I think this is one of those zones where they're accusing Biden and Harris of doing something that literally every presidential ticket has done for 50 years.
Yeah. What does the FEC now have to do in terms of figuring out a resolution, and how long do you expect that to take? And I have a question to kind of piggyback on that is where does the difference here lie in between what the FEC is going to do and what the actual courts are going to do?
Yeah, so the Federal Election Commission enforcement process is actually fairly straightforward. And again, this is, rote law. This is well understood, spelled out in the statute. Anybody can file a complaint, right? They have every right to send in the complaint, as they have done. The Federal Election Commission processes those in an orderly way, and to determine first, ultimately, whether or not there is reason to believe a violation has occurred. To do that, they're going to send a copy of the complaint to the Biden-Harris committee to ask them if they would like to respond. I think the committee can make a very convincing response, exactly as we've explained, that there's nothing to transfer. This has been Harris's committee. It's still her committee. In order to take action, they need to have 4 votes to find that there is first reason to believe, then that there is probable cause to believe that there has been a violation to take place. Without those 4 votes, the committee simply doesn't have the basis to find a violation, and the committee and the voters and the people who donate to the campaign can go on doing what they're doing without issue.
How many people sit on the committee, and what is the political makeup of the committee?
Yeah, so the Federal Election Commission has 6 members. No more than 3 can be appointed by either major political party. So right now there are 3 appointees that are Democrats, 3 that are Republicans, and lately they actually have had some greater success finding consensus on things that have been traditionally deadlocked kinds of issues. So I don't know that I rule out the prospect of coming to some consensus on this, but I really don't see a clear basis to determine that the committee has done anything wrong here for all the reasons we've discussed.
Now, if, let's say, for example, there is consensus in deference to Biden-Harris on this issue, if Republicans want to engage in litigation, what are the next steps from there?
Yep. So there is a private right of action that's built into the Federal Election Campaign Act that after the commission has reached a decision, you have a period of time in which you can take that decision into court and challenge it as an unlawful agency action. It's really, I don't see a realistic way for that to take place between now and the election. And really for a variety of reasons, not least a tradition of federal court abstention on issues that could impact election results. So both given the long history of how this has actually been done, the paper-thin basis at best to try to squint hard enough to find a way to look at this as a violation, and not least, Brian, again, I really like the way you framed this earlier, the expectation of the donors and the people who actually supplied this money in the first place, understanding that they were supporting Kamala Harris as part of this ticket. For Joe Biden to have decided that he's not going to be part of it is entirely a decision he's within his rights to do. For Kamala Harris to step up as the sitting vice president and take over the ticket is a completely predictable result. And I just don't see a basis for anybody to think that there's been something untoward here for results that are all predictable, and to even the point that some people found it surprising that Biden didn't step out before he, in fact, actually did. Yeah. A lot of reasons to think that there's much more smoke here than fire at best.
You've got a paper-thin basis, and then Judge Cannon looking at that and being like, try me. I'm ready. Paper-thin basis is my middle name. To that exact point then, and let's end off with this. What does it say that Republicans are solely focused on preventing Americans' legitimate donations for the Biden-Harris ticket from being used by one member of that ticket?
Right. I think, again, it's they have a very quick response to change the level of abstraction around any issue that they're confronting, right? So what I mean by that here is they seem to try to frame this as a undermining of democracy, that because Biden had been running until he decided to change his mind and no longer run, somehow that is what is equal to like a January 6th, right? That like the violent attempt to stop the counting of electoral votes is somehow in any way remotely close to a political decision made by a political person for political reasons in the course of a presidential campaign. And so I think, again, it's the idea of kind of throwing mud against the wall is not just on the chance that perhaps there's a Judge Cannon out there who's willing to take a novel interpretation to try to gum up the works a little further, but also just to kind of muddy the water and to make it, to hope to make it harder to see actual abuses of the democratic process for what they are, and try to muddy them up with things that are really, again, all smoke and no fire.
Yeah, I think if we're looking for actual abuses of the democratic process, the call is coming from inside the House as far as Republicans are concerned. Joe, as always, thank you so much for your expertise. I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure, Brian.